My daughter-in-law stood in my living room with her arms crossed and a cold look in her eyes. She told me I was no longer welcome in my grandchildren's lives. She said I was toxic, and the kids didn't need someone like me confusing them. I looked at my son standing behind her, waiting for him to defend me. He just stared at the floor and stayed silent. Not a single word. I didn't argue with her. I didn't beg or plead. I simply nodded and walked them to the door. I watched them drive away and felt my heart break into pieces right there on my front porch. 6 months later, my daughter-in-law called me sobbing on the phone. My grandchildren had found something she had been hiding from them, and what happened next changed everything for all of us. My name is Ruthie Hollander. I am 69 years old, and the woman who tried to erase me from my grandchildren's lives just learned that love always finds a way. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. I have lived in the same cozy bungalow in a small town in Oregon for over 30 years. My husband Bernard and I bought this house when our son Dennis was just starting middle school. We raised him here. We celebrated every birthday and holiday in these rooms. Bernard built a tire swing in the backyard that still hangs from the old oak tree. I planted a rose garden along the fence that blooms every spring with the most beautiful pink and yellow flowers. Bernard passed away 7 years ago from complications with diabetes. He had been sick for a long time, and we knew the end was coming. But knowing doesn't make it easier. When he died, a part of me went with him. I had to learn how to live alone for the first time in my life. It was hard, but I found my way through the grief by focusing on the people I still had. My son, my grandchildren, my community. I spent my career as an elementary school art teacher. I retired about 10 years ago, but I never stopped teaching. I volunteer at the local community center where I run free art classes for children. I love watching their faces light up when they create something beautiful with their own hands. Painting has always been my way of expressing what words cannot say. My little art studio in the back of my house is filled with canvases and brushes and jars of paint in every color you can imagine. My son Dennis is 42 years old. He works as an IT consultant, which means he spends most of his time staring at computer screens and fixing problems I don't understand. Dennis has always been a quiet person. He avoids arguments and goes along with whatever makes the people around him happy. I used to think that made him easygoing. Now I realize it made him weak when it mattered most. Dennis was married before. His first wife, Lynette, was a wonderful woman. They had 2 children together. Bria is 12 now, and Colton is 9. Lynette died in a car accident when Colton was only 3 years old. It was a devastating loss for our whole family. Dennis fell apart after she died. He didn't know how to take care of 2 young children on his own while working full-time. I stepped in without hesitation. I picked up Bria and Colton from school every day. I made them dinner and helped them with homework. I tucked them into bed and read them stories until they fell asleep. I held them when they cried for their mother. I became their anchor during the darkest time of their little lives. The bond we built during those years was unbreakable. At least I thought it was. 3 years ago, Dennis met a woman named Shayla. They dated for 6 months and then got married quickly. Shayla is 38 and works as a marketing executive. She is confident and assertive and always needs to be in control of every situation. From the very first time I met her, something felt off. She smiled politely, but her eyes never warmed up. She looked at me like I was an obstacle standing in her way. If you have ever loved someone who was taken from you, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. The warning signs started small. At first, Shayla would reschedule my visits with the grandchildren at the last minute. She would say something came up, or the kids had too much homework, or they weren't feeling well. I didn't think much of it at first. Life gets busy, and plans change. But then the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would pass without me seeing Bria and Colton. When I called to talk to them, Shayla would answer and say they were busy or already asleep, even when it was the middle of the afternoon. I tried to be understanding. Shayla was new to the family, and she was adjusting to life as a stepmother. I thought maybe she needed space to build her own relationship with the children, so I stepped back. I stopped dropping by unannounced. I waited for invitations instead of assuming I was welcome. I gave her room to settle in and find her place. But the more I stepped back, the more she pushed me away. Then the comments started. Whenever I did see the children, Shayla would make little remarks that felt like jabs wrapped in polite smiles. She would say things like, "You spoil them too much," or "They need structure, not treats." Once she told me that children get confused when too many adults try to parent them. She said it was important for Bria and Colton to see her as their mother now. The way she emphasized that word made my stomach turn. I noticed that Bria and Colton were changing too. They used to run into my arms every time they saw me. They used to tell me everything about their days and their friends and their dreams. But now they seemed hesitant. They looked at Shayla before answering my questions, like they were checking for permission. The light in their eyes dimmed whenever she was in the room. My heart ached seeing them so guarded and careful. One Sunday afternoon, Dennis and Shayla showed up at my house without calling first. I could tell something was wrong the moment they walked through the door. Shayla's face was hard and her jaw was tight. Dennis looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. They sat down in my living room, and Shayla immediately started talking. She accused me of undermining her authority as a stepmother. She said I had been telling Bria and Colton negative things about her behind her back. She claimed I was poisoning their minds and making it impossible for her to connect with them. She said the children had been acting distant and disrespectful, and I was the reason why. I was stunned. I had never said a single bad word about Shayla to the children, not once. I always encouraged them to give her a chance and treat her with respect. I tried to explain this, but Shayla wouldn't let me finish a sentence. She talked over me and raised her voice and twisted everything I said. She had already made up her mind, and nothing I said was going to change it. I looked at my son sitting on my couch. I pleaded with my eyes for him to say something, to stand up for me, to tell his wife that she was wrong. But Dennis just sat there staring at the floor, like a child who was afraid of getting in trouble. He mumbled something about everyone needing to calm down, but he didn't defend me. He didn't ask Shayla for any proof of her accusations. He just let her attack me without saying a word. Then Shayla delivered the final blow. She announced that effective immediately, I was no longer allowed to see Bria and Colton. She said the children didn't need a toxic grandmother filling their heads with negativity. She told me not to call and not to visit and not to send gifts. She said this was for the good of the family, and there was nothing I could do about it. Every part of me wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her she was lying and manipulating everyone around her. But I looked at Dennis and saw fear in his eyes. I realized that arguing would only make things worse, so I nodded quietly and walked them to the door. I watched them leave and stood on my porch alone, feeling like my whole world had just collapsed. The first few weeks after the ban were some of the darkest days I had experienced since Bernard died. I walked through my house in a fog of grief and disbelief. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of my grandchildren. The drawings Bria had made for me were still hanging on my refrigerator. The little wooden birdhouse Colton and I had painted together was still sitting on my windowsill. Their laughter still echoed in my memory every time I walked past the spare bedroom where they used to sleep during sleepover. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I would pick up the phone a dozen times a day, wanting to call them, and then put it back down, remembering that I wasn't allowed. The silence in my house was suffocating. I had spent years filling this home with love and family, and now it felt like an empty shell. I cried more in those first weeks than I had cried in years. My friends from the community center noticed that something was wrong. They asked me what happened, and I told them the truth. They were shocked and angry on my behalf. Some of them encouraged me to fight back. They said I should hire a lawyer and demand visitation rights. They said I shouldn't let Shayla get away with this. But I knew that going to war would only hurt the children. Bria and Colton had already lost their mother. The last thing they needed was to be caught in the middle of a legal battle between the adults in their lives. One night, I was sitting alone in my art studio, staring at a blank canvas. I didn't have the energy to paint. I didn't have the energy to do anything. But as I sat there in the quiet, I started thinking about my grandchildren and how much I wanted them to know I was still here. I wanted them to know that I hadn't abandoned them. I wanted them to know that my love for them hadn't disappeared just because Shayla said I couldn't visit. That's when the idea came to me. Shayla had banned me from seeing the children. She had told me not to call or visit or send gifts, but she hadn't said anything about writing letters. I realized I could still reach out to Bria and Colton in a way that Shayla might not expect. Even if the letters never reached them, at least I would know that I had tried. At least I would have a way to pour out my love instead of letting it build up inside me with nowhere to go. I started writing that very night. I pulled out a stack of nice stationery that I had been saving for special occasions. I picked up my favorite pen and I began to write. The words flowed out of me like water breaking through a dam. I told Bria how proud I was of her for working so hard in school. I told Colton about the funny squirrel that had been stealing seeds from my bird feeder. I wrote about memories we had shared together and adventures we had been on. I told them stories about their grandfather Bernard and how much he would have loved watching them grow up. At the end of each letter, I painted a small watercolor picture just for them. A butterfly for Bria, because she loved catching them in the garden. A dinosaur for Colton because he was obsessed with prehistoric creatures. I signed every letter with the same words. I love you always and forever, Grandma Ruthie. I mailed the first letters the next morning. I wrote their names on the envelopes in big, clear letters, so there would be no mistake about who they were for. I knew there was a good chance Shayla would intercept them. I knew she might throw them away before the children ever saw them, but I sent them anyway. I decided I would keep writing every single week no matter what. I would fill that mailbox with so much love that eventually something would have to break through. Weeks turned into months. I never received a reply, but I never stopped writing. Every letter was an act of faith. Every stamp was a prayer. I refused to let Shayla's silence be the end of my story. 6 months passed since I had last seen my grandchildren. 6 months of silence. 6 months of writing letters every single week without ever receiving a reply. I had sent over 25 letters by then, each one filled with love and stories and little paintings I made just for Bria and Colton. I had no way of knowing if they ever saw a single one, but I kept writing because stopping would have felt like giving up on them, and I was never going to do that. Then one Saturday evening, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw Shayla's name. My heart started pounding. In 6 months, she had never called me, not once. I answered the phone with shaking hands and heard something I never expected. Shayla was crying, not angry tears, not frustrated tears, deep, broken sobs that made it hard for her to speak. She kept trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. I asked her what was wrong. I asked if the children were okay. She finally managed to catch her breath and started explaining what had happened. Earlier that day, Bria and Colton had been playing in the garage. They were looking for an old basketball when they noticed a box sitting on a high shelf behind some storage bins. Colton climbed up to see what was inside and pulled down the box. When they opened it, they found dozens of envelopes. Every single one had their names written on the front in my handwriting. The children had opened the letters right there on the garage floor. They sat together and read through every single one. They saw the stories I had written about their grandfather. They saw the memories I had shared about our time together. They saw the little watercolor paintings I had made just for them. They read my words telling them how much I loved them and how I thought about them every single day. And they realized that their grandmother had never stopped reaching out. Someone had just been hiding the truth from them. Shayla told me that when the children came back inside, they were furious. Bria confronted her with the letters in her hands and demanded to know why she had kept them hidden. Colton was crying and asking why Shayla didn't want them to know their grandma loved them. Bria accused Shayla of lying about me being toxic. She said there was nothing toxic in those letters. Only love, only kindness, only a grandmother who missed her grandchildren more than anything in the world. Shayla admitted that she didn't know what to say. She tried to make excuses, but nothing she said made things better. Both children refused to speak to her. They locked themselves in their rooms and wouldn't come out. Bria told her father that she wanted to see Grandma Ruthie immediately, and she wasn't going to take no for an answer. Dennis didn't argue. He finally saw what his wife had done, and he was ashamed. Shayla begged me to come over. She said the children were asking for me and she didn't know how to fix what she had broken. I could hear the desperation in her voice. Part of me wanted to let her suffer in that guilt. She had caused me 6 months of heartbreak and stolen precious time I could never get back. But this wasn't about her. It was about Bria and Colton. They needed me, and I wasn't going to waste another moment. I drove to their house that evening. When I walked through the front door, Bria and Colton came running down the hallway and threw themselves into my arms. They held onto me so tight, like they were afraid I might disappear again. They were both crying and talking at the same time. They told me how much they missed me. They apologized for not reaching out, even though none of this was their fault. I held them close and whispered that everything was going to be okay now. I told them I never stopped loving them. I told them I never stopped fighting for them, and I promised them I was never going away again. That evening in Dennis's living room was the beginning of a long journey toward healing. After I held my grandchildren for what felt like an hour, I finally looked up and saw Shayla standing in the corner of the room. Her face was red and swollen from crying. She looked smaller somehow. The confident, controlling woman who had banned me from this house 6 months ago was gone. In her place stood someone who had finally realized the damage she had caused. Shayla walked over to me slowly and apologized. She admitted that she had been jealous of the bond I shared with Bria and Colton. She said that when she married Dennis, she wanted to become their mother. She wanted them to love her the way they loved me. But instead of building her own relationship with them, she tried to tear down mine. She thought that removing me from the picture would make room for her. Instead, it only made the children trust her less and miss me more. I listened to her apology without interrupting. I could see that her remorse was genuine. She wasn't just sorry because she got caught. She was sorry because she finally understood how much pain she had caused. I told her that I appreciated her honesty, but that trust would take time to rebuild. I told her that what she did was cruel, and it had hurt not just me, but the children she claimed to love. Forgiveness was possible, but it wouldn't happen overnight. Dennis came over and hugged me with tears in his eyes. He apologized for being a coward. He said he should have stood up for me from the very beginning. He said he was so afraid of conflict that he let his wife hurt the person who had always been there for him. He promised to be stronger and to never let anything like this happen again. I hugged my son back and told him that I loved him. I told him that the past was behind us, and what mattered now was how we moved forward together. In the weeks and months that followed, our family slowly began to heal. Shayla started attending therapy to work on her insecurities and her need to control everything around her. She learned that being a stepmother didn't mean replacing the people who came before her. It meant adding to the love that already existed. She made a genuine effort to change, and I could see her trying even when it was hard for her. Bria and Colton struggled to trust Shayla again. They were polite, but distant with her for a long time. Shayla had to earn back their respect one small gesture at a time. She started asking them about their days and actually listening to the answers. She stopped trying to control every detail of their lives. She gave them space to have their own feelings and their own relationships. Slowly, the walls between them began to come down. I resumed my regular visits with my grandchildren. Every weekend, they came to my house, and we painted together in my art studio. We baked cookies and worked in the garden and made up for all the time we had lost. The letters I had written during those 6 months became treasured keepsakes. Bria kept them in a special wooden box under her bed. Colton memorized his favorite stories and asked me to tell them again and again. Those letters became proof that love doesn't give up even when the world tries to silence it. Dennis became a better father and a better son. He stopped avoiding difficult conversations and started speaking up when something wasn't right. He made sure I was included in every holiday and every milestone. He learned that keeping the peace at any cost isn't peace at all. Sometimes you have to stand up for the people who matter most, even when it's uncomfortable. Shayla and I never became best friends, but we learned to respect each other. She even asked me to teach her some painting techniques so she could do art projects with the children. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. We found a way to coexist as two women who both loved the same kids. I never stopped writing letters to my grandchildren even after the ban was lifted. It became our special tradition. Every week, Bria and Colton received a handwritten note from Grandma Ruthie with a small painting or a pressed flower tucked inside. They kept every single one. Looking back, I am grateful that I chose love over anger. I didn't fight with harsh words or legal battles. I fought with patience and persistence. I fought with letters that carried my heart across the distance Shayla tried to create. And in the end, love won, because love always finds a way. If this story reminded you that love is stronger than any obstacle, make sure to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments if you have ever fought for someone you love in a way that surprised everyone around you.